Every rule of economics says this should have destroyed them by now, it didn't. And understanding why reveals something most people will never see coming. America creates money out of nothing. Trillions of dollars. Not backed by gold, not limited by production, just created. And while every other country that tried this collapsed within years, America keeps doing it. The currency stays strong. The system continues. This isn't luck. This isn't American exceptionalism. This is a machine built 70 years ago that still runs on one thing: global need. But that need is quietly disappearing, and when it's gone, everything changes. Money printing is economic suicide. The pattern never varies. Weimar Germany tried it in the 1920s. Within 18 months, their currency was worthless. Citizens pushed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy bread. Life savings that took decades to build evaporated in weeks. Zimbabwe did it in the 2000s. Hyperinflation reached 11 million%. A loaf of bread cost billions. The currency died completely. Venezuela throughout the 2010s. Same story. Hyperinflation gutted the economy. The middle class vanished overnight. Millions fled with whatever they could carry. These weren't backward nations operating in darkness. They had central banks, trained economists, prestigious universities. They understood they saw the warnings, they printed anyway, and they collapsed anyway. The mechanism is brutally simple. Create too much money, people lose trust, they spend it immediately before it loses more value. Prices explode across the economy, government prints more to keep up with rising costs, trust evaporates completely, the currency becomes worthless paper. This isn't theory, this is documented reality that's repeated across continents and centuries. So why is America different? Since 2008, the United States has created more dollars than existed in the entire American economy before that point. Quantitative easing, stimulus packages, emergency programs, different names, same fundamental action. Creating money that didn't exist. The supply has expanded on a scale that should have triggered hyperinflation years ago. The kind that destroys savings, devastates retirement accounts, makes imported goods unaffordable, yet the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. Your paycheck still buys groceries. Inflation exists but hasn't spiraled into the death spiral. The system functions. This seems impossible based on every historical precedent, but it's not. It's three mechanisms working together that give America something no other nation has ever possessed. And those mechanisms are breaking down right now. Money only works if people believe in it. A dollar bill is paper and ink. A bank balance is electrical signals in a computer. They have value because we collectively agree they do. The moment that agreement breaks, the value vanishes instantly. This is why printing money normally kills currencies fast. People notice the dilution. They see prices rising. They lose faith. They try to spend before it loses more value. The spiral accelerates until the currency is dead. Every nation that prints excessively hits this wall of broken trust. Every nation except one. The difference is where the money goes. When America prints dollars, they don't stay trapped in America. They flow into a global system that needs them, not wants them, needs them. International trade runs on dollars. When Japan buys oil from Saudi Arabia, it doesn't use yen, it uses dollars. When Germany buys electronics from Korea, not euros, dollars. When Brazil imports machinery from China, dollars again. The dollar sits at the center of almost every major transaction on Earth. This has been fundamental reality since World War II ended with America as the dominant economic and military power. This creates what economists call structural demand. Every country must hold massive dollar reserves just to conduct international trade. Central banks worldwide hold trillions in dollar reserves, not earning significant returns, not generating wealth, just sitting in accounts because they need dollars to function in the global economy. Companies hold dollars for imports, banks hold dollars for international settlements, governments hold dollars for commodity purchases. This demand exists completely separate from anything happening inside America's domestic economy. When America prints money, much of it flows immediately into this global infrastructure. Foreign central banks absorb it into their reserves. Foreign companies use it for transactions. Foreign governments hold it for energy purchases. The newly created money spreads across the entire planet instead of concentrating within American borders. When Zimbabwe creates money, every single unit stays trapped in Zimbabwe. Small economy, nowhere for the excess to go. Immediate hyperinflation. When America creates money, it disperses globally across an economy orders of magnitude larger. The inflationary impact dilutes across every nation that holds or uses dollars. This is why your grocery bill didn't explode when the money supply doubled. The inflation got exported. But there's a second mechanism that makes this even more powerful. Oil. In 1974, after the gold standard collapsed and currencies were floating freely, America made a deal with Saudi Arabia that rewired global finance forever. America would provide military protection, advanced weapons systems, and political backing in the region. Saudi Arabia would sell oil exclusively in dollars. Not in rials, not in a basket of currencies, only dollars. And crucially, Saudi Arabia would use its massive influence to convince other oil-producing nations to do the same. This single agreement transformed the dollar from merely a currency into a survival requirement for every nation on Earth. Oil runs modern civilization, not just cars and planes, transportation networks, manufacturing processes, electricity generation, agricultural machinery, plastics production, pharmaceuticals, everything. And if oil only sells in dollars, every country must hold substantial dollar reserves, not as preference or convenience, as absolute necessity. China needs dollars, or its economy stops functioning. India needs dollars, or the lights go out. Europe needs dollars, or industry shuts down. Even countries that actively oppose American foreign policy, that criticize American actions internationally, must hold billions in dollars, because they need energy, and energy requires dollars. This is the part most people completely miss. Dollar dominance isn't about American economic superiority or better management. It's about structural dependence built directly into the global system, a system America helped design. The third mechanism completes the cycle and makes it self-reinforcing. Treasury bonds. When America prints money, the Federal Reserve doesn't just create cash. The process is more sophisticated. The Federal Reserve creates money by purchasing treasury bonds from the government. These bonds are debt instruments, legal promises to repay borrowed money with interest over time. And these treasury bonds are considered the safest investment on Earth. Not because American debt levels are low or responsible. They're catastrophically high. Not because the American economy is uniquely productive or strong, though it is large, but because treasury bonds are denominated in dollars, and America controls the dollar supply. Think carefully about what this means for foreign governments. If you're a central bank holding billions of dollars in reserves, you need somewhere to put that money. Cash sitting in vaults earns no return. You need to invest it somewhere safe and liquid, somewhere you can access it quickly if needed. The obvious choice, often the only practical choice, is American treasury bonds. So foreign governments and central banks purchase trillions of dollars worth of American government debt. This creates a cycle that feeds itself perpetually. America prints money. That money flows into global trade systems. Foreign entities accumulate dollars through trade and transactions. They invest those accumulated dollars back into American debt. The money returns to America, funding government operations that frequently involve printing more money. America borrows from the world in its own currency. If China holds $1 trillion in American debt and the dollar weakens through inflation, China's investment loses real value. America's debt burden doesn't. America has successfully exported inflation risk to its creditors. No other nation in history has had this arrangement. When Argentina borrows money internationally, it borrows in dollars or euros. If the Argentine peso collapses, Argentina still owes full value in foreign currency. The debt doesn't shrink, the burden actually increases. But when America borrows in dollars, and the dollar weakens through inflation, America's real debt burden decreases. Inflation erodes what America owes. These three mechanisms working together in concert create a structure allowing money creation at scales that would completely annihilate any other economy. Global trade creates constant structural dollar demand. The petrodollar system makes that demand mandatory for survival. Treasury bond recycling returns printed money to America while making foreigners absorb the inflation risk. This system has operated successfully for 50 years. But systems that work brilliantly under specific conditions become increasingly fragile when those conditions start to change. And those conditions are changing right now. History provides the clearest warning about what happens when empires believe their currency privilege is permanent and guaranteed. Rome learned this lesson slowly and painfully over centuries. At its absolute peak, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean world. Roman silver denarii circulated everywhere the empire's influence reached. Egypt, Gaul, Britannia, Hispania, Greece, Asia Minor. Everyone used Roman coins because Rome was overwhelmingly dominant militarily and economically, and its currency was backed by that complete dominance. This gave Rome extraordinary power. It could issue more currency, and the vast empire would absorb it without immediate inflationary pressure. More territory meant more currency users, meant Rome could create more coins without triggering inflation. But expansion ended inevitably. Under Emperor Trajan in 117, Rome reached maximum territorial extent. The empire stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. No more conquests were feasible. No more tribute flowing from newly conquered peoples. Yet costs continued escalating relentlessly. Legions required regular payment. Extensive borders needed constant defense. Infrastructure across 3 continents demanded ongoing maintenance. Revenue couldn't match expenditures. The gap widened yearly. The solution seemed straightforward to Roman officials. Debase the currency. Reduce the silver content in each coin. Produce more coins from the same amount of silver. Initially, this worked without obvious problems. The empire was so geographically vast that debased currency dispersed across enormous territories without immediate visible impact. But gradually, inevitably, merchants noticed. They began weighing coins carefully, charging more for coins with less actual silver content. Inflation appeared in markets. Rome debased further to cover mounting costs. Inflation accelerated across the empire. By the 3rd century, Roman coins contained almost no silver whatsoever. Hyperinflation destroyed economic stability throughout the empire. Not because Rome was militarily conquered by external enemies, because it tried to print its way out of structural imbalances it refused to address through difficult political choices. The pattern matters more than the specific historical details. Rome could debase its currency successfully as long as the empire kept expanding territorially, and everyone throughout that vast empire needed Roman coins for commerce. When expansion stopped but costs remained high and growing, the system fractured from within. Rome had constructed an economic structure requiring perpetual growth to function properly. When growth ended, the structure collapsed internally. This is where the warning becomes directly relevant to the present. Because America's system has an identical structural dependency, it requires the world to continue needing dollars, to continue accepting dollars for international trade, to continue purchasing Treasury bonds as safe investments. As long as this continues, money printing functions without triggering domestic hyperinflation. But this isn't guaranteed by natural economic laws. It's maintained by choices other countries make based on their perceived interests, and those choices are measurably changing. Britain learned this exact lesson after World War II. They won the war, they stood with the Allies, and emerged victorious against fascism. But the cost of that victory was extraordinary and underestimated. Britain had borrowed heavily during the war, primarily from the United States. British industry was damaged and depleted. The global empire was becoming prohibitively expensive to maintain, and most critically for the financial system, the pound sterling was rapidly losing its status as the global reserve currency. That role was transferring inexorably to the American dollar. Britain attempted to maintain everything simultaneously. The empire spanning a quarter of the globe, global military presence and power projection, expanding welfare state and social programs, international financial leadership role. The country couldn't afford all of it simultaneously. The numbers didn't work, but politically, surrendering any single piece seemed completely impossible. Each had powerful constituencies, so Britain borrowed extensively, printed money when needed, employed increasingly creative financial engineering to delay hard decisions. For a while this appeared to work adequately. The pound remained important in global finance. British influence persisted internationally. But underneath the surface appearance of continuity, the fundamental structure was systematically failing. By the 1970s, Britain faced undeniable crisis that could no longer be papered over. Inflation was persistently high and accelerating. The currency was weak and getting weaker monthly. The government was forced to seek humiliating emergency loans from the International Monetary Fund. The empire had dissolved almost completely. The pound had become a secondary regional currency. Britain had declined from global superpower to important but clearly not dominant nation, not because it was militarily conquered by enemies, because it tried to maintain a global role it could no longer afford, while refusing to make necessary adjustments until forced by acute crisis. The lesson isn't that America will necessarily follow Britain's exact trajectory in detail. The lesson is that reserve currency status has never been permanent in history, not once. It transfers based on underlying economic and political realities, and countries holding reserve currency status consistently try to maintain that privileged status long after the fundamental conditions supporting it have shifted underneath. Britain continued acting like a financial superpower, even as the economic reality changed. When adjustment finally came, it was significantly more painful and disruptive than it would have been with earlier proactive reforms. America might be in a structurally similar position right now, still operating as if dollar dominance is permanent and guaranteed forever, still borrowing at will and printing when convenient as if global demand for dollars is locked in perpetually, still making policy based on the implicit assumption that other countries will always need to hold massive dollar reserves. But the conditions that created dollar dominance in the 1940s and solidified it with the petrodollar system in the 1970s, are measurably changing. The world is genuinely multipolar now in ways it wasn't before. Alternative systems exist, and are being actively developed and implemented. Rising powers are methodically building parallel structures rather than directly confronting the existing system, which is strategically much smarter. China has been steadily reducing its Treasury bond holdings for over a decade, not dramatically or suddenly in ways that would crash markets, but consistently. Year after year after year, China holds fewer American government bonds. Russia liquidated most of its Treasury holdings after facing Western sanctions that froze assets. Saudi Arabia, the absolute cornerstone of the entire petrodollar system, has begun accepting yuan for oil sales. Not for all sales, not even for most, but the precedent is set. The absolute requirement is broken. These aren't hypothetical scenarios that analysts worry about for the future. These are observable trends happening right now in real time. Why is this happening? Because the same mechanism giving America extraordinary power creates corresponding vulnerability for everyone else. When America freezes foreign assets, it weaponizes dollar dependence. When America imposes sanctions, it severs nations from dollar-based trade networks. Every single time this happens, affected countries and their allies seek alternatives, not from ideological opposition to America, from completely rational self-preservation. Dependence on dollars means direct exposure to American foreign policy decisions. China and Russia have constructed alternative payment systems allowing bilateral trade without dollar intermediation, currency swap agreements between central banks, digital payment networks that bypass SWIFT. The BRICS nations actively discuss creating alternative reserve currencies to reduce dependence. Europe explores mechanisms to conduct trade that bypasses dollar-based systems specifically to avoid American sanctions affecting European companies. None of these alternatives have replaced the dollar as the dominant global currency, but they're systematically reducing the absolute necessity of holding dollars. And that reduction, even though gradual and partial, directly undermines the mechanisms allowing America to print money without facing immediate domestic consequences. And this is where the actual danger lies for American living standards. The system doesn't break suddenly in one dramatic moment. It erodes progressively. Each country that diversifies away from dollars reduces global dollar demand incrementally. Individually, these actions seem insignificant when examined. China reducing treasury holdings by a few $100 billion doesn't crash anything immediately. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for 5% of oil sales doesn't end the petrodollar overnight. But these actions accumulate over time, and crucially, they all consistently move in the same direction, away from dollar dependence and toward alternatives. Think of it as a dam developing structural cracks over time. Small cracks don't cause immediate catastrophic failure. Water seeps through slowly. Each crack widens gradually over months and years. The structure continues holding for years, even decades after the first crack appears. Engineers might not even notice immediately, but the trajectory is set irreversibly. More cracks develop, more water seeps through, more structural integrity degrades incrementally. At some threshold that's difficult to predict precisely, accumulated damage reaches a critical point where the dam fails rapidly, not because of a single crack or one dramatic event, because the underlying structure has been compromised beyond its fundamental capacity to hold. This is the genuine risk America faces, not imminent dramatic collapse that makes global headlines. Gradual, systematic erosion of the mechanisms that currently prevent money printing from causing hyperinflation. And because this process unfolds slowly over years and decades, because each individual year seems manageable and non-critical, the political system doesn't respond with appropriate urgency. Why make difficult choices that anger voters when the system still appears to function? Why cut popular spending programs when borrowing remains easy? Why implement painful structural reforms when the crisis feels distant and theoretical rather than immediate? Rome faced this exact paralysis. For decades, even centuries, currency debasement worked adequately enough. Each generation inherited a slightly weaker currency than the previous generation, but nothing felt catastrophic in the immediate moment. Politicians had absolutely no incentive to stop the process. Making hard choices meant losing power to rivals. Continuing debasement meant maintaining power and popularity, so they continued the pattern until the accumulated damage made systemic collapse inevitable and irreversible. Modern finance is far more sophisticated than Rome's relatively simple system. Communication information is instantaneous across the globe. Markets adjust in milliseconds to new information, but the underlying dynamic is structurally identical. A system that works brilliantly under specific conditions becomes increasingly fragile when those supporting conditions begin to change. And the people operating the system, because they're necessarily focused on immediate concerns and short-term stability, consistently fail to see the long-term structural shift until it's too late to reverse course smoothly. American debt exceeds $34 trillion currently. Annual budget deficits consistently run over $1 trillion. The Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet to levels that would have been considered impossible or insane 20 years ago. Yet Treasury bond yields remain relatively low by historical standards. The dollar stays strong against most other major currencies. International demand for dollars continues. The system keeps functioning day to day. To many observers and mainstream economists, this proves the system is fundamentally sustainable indefinitely. If you can accumulate $34 trillion in debt and still possess the world's most trusted and demanded currency, clearly the absolute debt level doesn't matter in any practical sense. Some prominent economists argue explicitly that as long as debt is denominated in your own currency, as long as you retain the sovereign ability to print money to service that debt, the absolute debt level is essentially irrelevant to economic function. But this argument critically misses something fundamental. It's only true as long as others continue willingly accepting the currency you're printing. Rome could debase its currency successfully as long as the empire remained intact, and merchants had no practical alternative for commerce. Britain could borrow extensively as long as the pound was structurally needed for global trade and empire commerce. America can print money as long as dollars remain genuinely required for international commerce and energy purchases. The real statement should be debt doesn't matter as long as structural currency demand persists at current levels, and it's precisely that structural demand that's measurably changing right now. Japan offers an interesting comparison that reveals why America's situation contains unique structural vulnerability. Japan has a debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 200% currently, far higher than America's ratio. Yet Japan hasn't experienced hyperinflation or currency collapse. The yen remains functional for commerce. Why? Because Japanese government debt is held overwhelmingly by Japanese citizens and domestic institutions. The Bank of Japan prints yen. Japanese pension funds and banks purchase government bonds. The money circulates within a largely closed domestic system. Japan doesn't fundamentally depend on foreigners accepting and holding yen. It depends primarily on its own citizens continuing to have faith in the currency and system. America's situation is structurally different in a critical way. A substantial portion of American government debt is held by foreign governments, foreign central banks, and foreign financial institutions. America depends fundamentally on continued global acceptance of dollars. This provides enormous advantages when the system functions properly. It allows borrowing at scales no purely domestic system could possibly support, but it simultaneously creates profound vulnerability that doesn't exist in Japan's case. If foreign holders collectively decide they prefer holding euros or yuan or diversified currency baskets instead of concentrated dollar holdings, America loses its unique ability to print without facing immediate hyperinflationary consequences. The question has never been whether this will eventually happen. History demonstrates with complete clarity that reserve currencies always lose their dominant status eventually. The pattern is remarkably consistent across centuries and civilizations. The Dutch guilder dominated global trade throughout the 17th century. Pound sterling dominated throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The dollar has dominated since the mid-20th century. Each maintained dominance for roughly a century before being replaced by the next. The historical pattern is completely unambiguous. Reserve currency status is always temporary, never permanent. The real questions are timing and recognition. When does the erosion of structural demand become severe enough to fundamentally change how the system functions? And more critically, will policymakers recognize this structural shift before it becomes irreversible, or only after the transition is already locked in and unstoppable? The core challenge is that gradual change never feels urgent to political systems. Each individual year, dollar dominance decreases by a small percentage. Treasury bond demand from foreign buyers softens slightly. Oil trades in alternative currencies for incrementally more contracts. These changes don't trigger immediate crisis. They don't force emergency action. So the natural response is continuing current policies. Keep borrowing at will. Keep printing when convenient. Keep assuming the system that worked for 5 decades will automatically work for 5 more. This is precisely how structural shifts unfold in democratic systems, not through sudden dramatic shocks that force immediate response, but through accumulated choices that individually seem completely reasonable but collectively create irreversible transformation. The Roman Senate never voted to intentionally destroy their currency. Each individual decision to debase made perfect sense in isolation, given immediate pressures. The British Parliament never voted to deliberately end the empire. Each colonial independence seemed like a unique special case. American policymakers aren't voting to end dollar dominance. Each instance of money creation seems justified by immediate circumstances and pressing needs. But the accumulation creates an entirely new reality. And by the time that new reality becomes obvious to everyone, the ability to reverse course has usually already passed. This doesn't mean collapse is imminent or inevitable on any specific timeline. It means the conditions that have allowed America to print money without triggering hyperinflation are measurably changing right now. And that change, precisely because it's gradual rather than dramatic, receives far less attention and urgency than it objectively deserves given the stakes. The American system isn't magic. It's not American exceptionalism or divine favor. It's a specific set of mechanisms created by post-World War II economic and military dominance and maintained through decades of strategic choices. Those mechanisms are extraordinarily powerful. They've allowed debt accumulation and monetary expansion that would completely destroy any other country. But they are not permanent features of reality. They depend entirely on continued global demand for dollars. And that demand depends on choices other countries make based on their interests. Choices that are shifting, slowly but very observably, toward alternatives and diversification. Understanding this clearly doesn't require predicting specific future timelines. It requires seeing the present moment with clarity. America can print trillions without collapsing because the world still structurally needs dollars for trade and energy. But that need is no longer absolute or guaranteed forever. It's diminishing, not rapidly enough to cause immediate crisis that dominates news cycles, but steadily enough that the system 50 years from now will almost certainly look fundamentally different from the system today. Whether that inevitable transition unfolds smoothly through managed adjustment or creates significant disruption through crisis depends entirely on choices that haven't been made yet. History consistently demonstrates that countries rarely make necessary painful adjustments until absolutely forced to by crisis. The adjustments are politically difficult. They require sacrifice from voters. They mean accepting reduced international influence and altered living standards. Democratic systems focused on short electoral cycles structurally struggle to implement long-term reforms that cause short-term pain. So the overwhelming tendency is always to delay, to use all available tools like borrowing, money printing, and financial engineering to push problems into the future. This strategy works until suddenly it doesn't, until the accumulated weight of delayed decisions forces brutal adjustment under crisis conditions rather than controlled conditions. Rome delayed addressing structural imbalances until barbarian armies were literally breaching the frontiers. Britain delayed fundamental reforms until currency crisis forced humiliating intervention. America still has time. The system still functions. The mechanisms still work, but the trajectory is already set, not towards sudden dramatic collapse, towards slow systematic erosion of the unique conditions that made American money printing sustainable, toward a multipolar currency world where no single nation possesses the extraordinary privilege America has enjoyed for 70 years. This isn't a story with a clear, predetermined ending written in advance. It's a story still actively unfolding in real time. But understanding how the current system was constructed, understanding the specific mechanisms making it possible, understanding the consistent historical patterns of how these systems change, all of this provides crucial clarity about this moment. America can print money without immediate collapse, not because of inherent economic superiority, but because of structural global demand for dollars built into trade and energy systems. And that demand, carefully constructed through decades of strategic decisions and economic arrangements, is beginning to shift in observable ways. The question was never whether it would shift. The question is how quickly the shift unfolds, and whether the transition will be deliberately managed or chaotic and reactive. The world is watching these changes closely. Central banks are quietly diversifying their reserve holdings. Alternative payment systems are being actively developed and implemented. And slowly, almost invisibly to populations focused only on immediate domestic concerns, the foundation of American monetary privilege is changing. Not catastrophically breaking, methodically changing. And that change, when historians analyze this period decades from now, will likely be recognized as one of the most significant economic transitions of the 21st century. Not because America collapsed in dramatic fashion, but because the exceptional conditions that allowed America to print money without immediate consequence gradually, steadily, inevitably came to an end. Subscribe to Path to Profit.